It's time for Comeback Sports with Brandon, the Coach Perry, and Pat, the Shot Caller Flaherty. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Comeback Sports. It's our third episode of the series where we discuss 10 sports topics of the week. Folks, I am Pat, the Shot Caller Flaherty. I'm joined by my partner, Brandon, the Coach Perry. Brandon, what's up, buddy? How you doing this week, my man?
Hey, Pat. How's it going? I'm really excited, especially for today's show. So many amazing topics, a few that are really fresh off the press, and looking to get into them.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's so much going on in sports right now, pros, college, even high school level right now with everything that's happening. So we're going to get right to it. I think the biggest stories of the weekend, obviously, were the NFL playoffs. We had the wild card games over the weekend. So, Brandon, I know you want to kick this one off with our first topic.
Yeah, well, we're going to jump into the AFC playoffs. And first, I want to toot my own horn and say everybody that I picked to win on last week's show did win, including the Baltimore Ravens over the Tennessee Titans. And it actually was a closer game than I thought. But Baltimore came out on top with a really big second half. I don't know if did you watch that game, Pat?
I did. Baltimore was very impressive. You know, they don't have that explosive offense that, a lot of teams are trying to achieve these days in the NFL, but they controlled the game, I thought, throughout the second half. And in the first half, even though Tennessee got up 7, and you're saying, Baltimore is not a great team that can come back from a large deficit, you thought if they could at least stay within 7 for most of the game that they would be fine, and that's exactly what happened. And then, as you mentioned, the second half, they were terrific. The way they can run the ball, and then, everything changed with that Deshaun Jackson touchdown run. As soon as he made that unbelievable touchdown run, I think the Titans kind of ran out of gas at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Jackson, that was a huge run for him. And it was reminiscent to that Deshaun Jackson punt return. And so I know that was such a big play. And it broke the team's back like Deshaun Jackson did to the Giants there. I forgot what year that was, a few years back. But, Lamar Jackson with that big run in the second half, I think they needed that to really spark the rest of their offense. And he actually sparked their defense. I think Tennessee, as we saw throughout the year, was really built to run the ball behind King Henry and Derrick Henry running for over 2,000 yards. But I can tell you that it looked like the Ravens were actually built to stop the run with the addition of especially of Calais Campbell in the middle. And they held Derrick Henry in check as far as I'm concerned, especially for what we're used to seeing out of him. You didn't really get to see that much. No big runs out of him. He didn't really grind them down either. And on the other hand, like I said, Lamar Jackson really came to play, especially in that second half with that big run, and then just chipped it away. And then they just managed to keep the lead and really finish them off. And you know what? They're going on to the next round. And that next game against the Buffalo Bills, man, that's the game of the playoffs for me.
No question. I actually thought the game of the weekend was the Bills-Colts game. I thought that was probably the most evenly played out of all of them. And I thought the Colts they controlled the first half for the most part in that game, I thought. And then I think, Josh Allen, still being a young player, even though he had an MVP caliber season, still needed to kind of get in the swing of things when it comes to playoff games and really almost in being the favorite. Now, the Bills, for the longest time, have been the underdog. They've been behind the Patriots in the division. They've never been one of the top seeds in the AFC. Now they're the 2 seed, and I think it took them a little bit to really kind of understand that and get into playoff mode. But as soon as they got going, they started to play much better as well. But they almost gave up the lead at the end there because the Colts defense is still tough, even though Josh Allen had a great game. And, the Phillip Rivers, I think, actually outperformed a little bit. I didn't expect him to play that well. I know he made some mistakes, and because he's an older quarterback and because of his crazy weird release, his short release, there's some throws he just can't make, and I think that was probably the difference in the game. But Rivers did play a lot better than I expected in that one.
Sure, there's been some talks of Phillip Rivers actually retiring,
Right.
And I personally would be like, I do not want to see that happen. I mean, there's a shortage of quarterbacks already in the NFL. If he could gut it out and come back out for at least one more year for that Colts team, I think that would help the Colts especially. But I think it would just help us as NFL fans to have a team with a quarterback. I know, Jacoby Brissett is a great quarterback as well. Might be on the market to come back to New England as well as the rumor out there. But yeah, no, I thought the Colts really had a chance, led by Phillip Rivers, the experienced quarterback in the playoffs. I think was a huge experience for them. I think their play calling was amazing too. If you saw some of the play calling, especially in like key times, third down, they were amazing in that game. But they just did not have enough. Buffalo Bills were extremely explosive, and they were the team that I picked the win anyway. And then that's exactly what you've seen.
No question. And I think the third AFC game was the Cleveland-Pittsburgh game. We're actually going to get into that in a little more detail later on in the show, but obviously Cleveland won that one 48-37. Crazy game for Pittsburgh. Topic number 2 is actually – I'm sorry, Brandon, to cut you off there, pal. Topic number 2, we're going to get into the NFC playoff games, and these were not quite as close. I mean, a couple of the scores weren't that far apart in these two games, but I really thought this was – mostly a dominating performance by the teams that won. I think we'll start with the Rams beating Seattle 30-20, but the Rams dominated that game, both on the ground and defensively, even though they had an injury to their backup quarterback and their starter came in. So I think the Rams absolutely dominated Seattle, surprisingly, in that first game.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were first off wanted a targeting call, which against Jamal Adams really there. But if you've seen that there, once the quarterback goes down head first, especially, he becomes a runner. And he had crossed the line there, and he was a runner. And if you look at the hit, Jamal Adams takes his hit out of the way. It's pretty much textbook. Takes his hit out of the way, lowers the shoulder, and the game is so fast nowadays that you just have some extreme contact like that. And it was unfortunate for Warford there to get knocked out of the game. To be honest, I thought that was going to be the game-defining moment right there, and I didn't think the Rams were going to be able to do it, and only just because Jared Goff's coming off the thumb surgery, only, I believe, a week off the thumb surgery, but he came in and managed the game and looked pretty amazing, and that defense is just top-notch right now. That defense is built to win, and I think we're seeing that right now, and I don't want to bust out the whole cliche of defense wins championships, because I'm an offensive guy. I'm an offensive coordinator. I love seeing points scored. But this defense is amazing, led by Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely dominated that game. I thought Cam Akers was unbelievable in that game as well. I think he's an underrated running back in the NFL right now. But absolutely, the Rams' defense dominated that game. You saw Aaron Donald get that rib injury, so we'll see if that – I don't think it's going to keep him out whatsoever, but we'll see if it hampers him a little bit in the next round. But, yeah, I mean, the Rams are a tough out. They didn't win the division, but, they just beat the division winner in the NFC West, which was probably one of the best divisions throughout the season. And I was surprised at how poorly Seattle played, including Russell Wilson. Just had a tough day. He wasn't as accurate. They just seemed like thought they were gonna sleepwalk through this game because Goff was out and the Rams weren't quite the team that they had been 2 years ago. But the Rams came, punched them in the mouth, and I think that was it. They controlled the rest of the game. I mean, Seattle started to score a little bit at the end, but that was all Rams in that one. And then the next game would be the Bucs versus the Redskins, and obviously a lot closer than I think people expected because of who was starting at quarterback for the Redskins. Henke was the one that actually started for the Washington football team. Can't say Redskins anymore. My fault right there. But Alex Smith, they said, I think it was about an hour before the game that Smith was not going to play. And I think that
shocking.
A lot of people were like, wow, this is going to be a really tough game for Washington despite their good defense. And the Bucs came out early and put some points up on the board. Brady looked great, but the Redskins, hung tough because of that tough defense and because of that scrappy quarterback that they were able to bring in.
Yeah, no, Heineke, he really came off the bench and out of nowhere I mean, he played in, I believe it was the American Allegiance League of football, and I think also he might have got some XFL time, so
Yep.
maybe not out of nowhere for some people, but for NFL fans and the majority of NFL fans, he kind of came out of nowhere. But boy, did he come out and play great. I think he was really moving the ball. You saw him really change the game, really getting outside of the pocket with his legs and actually opening up more options, the run-pass option. And I thought he did a great job of just really coming out. And it really could have been one of those things really where they were preparing to face Alex Smith and had no clue of really what they were going to face once they saw Heineke come out there. And so just from a schematics type thing, that could have left the Bucs kind of like reeling for at least the first half before you go into the locker room and make some adjustments. But I thought Tom Brady played well. I thought the Bucs played well. Antonio Brown played well. Mike Evans played well. That defense looked great. They didn't have their star linebacker and Devin White due to COVID protocol. He's looking to come back this week and make a splash. And that takes us into our next topic, right, which is the big matchup in the NFC this week, which is Brady versus Brees in the NFC, and that's the Saints versus the Bucs. I really think that's going to be really one of the best key matchups this weekend.
Yeah, this third topic is going to be an interesting one. This is, we as Patriots fans, we've always said you want to see Brady versus Rodgers in the Super Bowl. You want to see Brady versus Brees in the Super Bowl. You want to see Brady versus, we finally got to see Brady versus Russell Wilson. But yeah, this is a matchup that a lot of people have wanted to see in the Super Bowl for a long time, and now it's in the postseason. I believe it's the first time these two have matched up against each other in the playoffs. They have matched up against each other in the past. In the NFL, Brees is actually 5-2 overall over the two careers of Brees and Brady in the NFL, which is very interesting. That goes over his years in San Diego and now with the New Orleans Saints, whereas Brady was with the Pats the seven, and all through the 7 matchups. They actually played against each other in college as well. Brady was at Michigan and Brees was at Purdue in a Big Ten matchup, and Michigan routed Purdue 38-12. But this is going to be very interesting. I think Brady just looks so much better than Brees right now, and obviously I think his weapons are in better shape as well. One of the biggest things you see with the Bucs, and then we saw it against Washington, who has a good defense, how many guys get wide open in that offense? And I don't think it's just scheme, although Arians does know how to get guys open, but there's so many guys you have to cover that guys are running free all over the place for the Bucs. Cameron Brate had a ton of catches just because, they're concentrating.
That guy.
Godwin, Mike Evans, Gronk, Antonio Brown. I mean, you got guys that are all pros out there, and then, Cameron Brate's wide open, and he's a talented receiver, like you said, as well.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think I mentioned Brate in the first show when we talked about the Bucs. Yeah. I think he kind of flies under the radar, but he did have a great game. And like you said, it's just so many people to be able to get the ball to there that I think it's just so easy for Brady. And as he's grown in age, Brady has gone more into a decipher mode where, like I said, he doesn't rely on his talent or his arm as much as he does breaking down the game, pre-snap and even post-snap, reading coverages. So he just knows where to put the ball, where his outlet is, whether he's going to dump the ball to Leonard Fournette. And that's a thing. I think Leonard Fournette has proven himself as a receiving back this year, something that he didn't do in Jacksonville that he's now doing in Tampa Bay, and it's turned out to be huge. But in this matchup, you really have two of the best quarterbacks of all time facing off. In my opinion, two of the top 5 quarterbacks of all time facing off in this. So it's honestly, it's just something. It's a historical game. I would like everybody to watch this because you might not get to see a matchup like this ever again, if not for a long, long time. And, the Saints, they're coming into this game looking pretty good. If they can get the ball to Alvin Kamara and really utilize him out of the backfield, running the ball, catching the ball, and get Michael Thomas going against this Bucs secondary and this Bucs defense, I think they have a good chance of making it a game. But I just think the Tampa Bay is kind of clicking on all cylinders right now. And like I said, it's going to be a huge addition with them getting linebacker Devin White back into the lineup this week. I'm picking the Tampa Bay Bucs to go ahead and win this game.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one, Brandon. The Saints have been very good throughout the season. Earlier on in the season, a lot of people were picking them to win the whole thing just by the way their defense was looking. Obviously, Michael Thomas is an outstanding receiver. You got Kamara, you got Latavius Murray. Jared Cook's looked pretty good the past couple of weeks, too, for the Saints, even though he didn't have, the greatest regular season. He looked good last week as well, but the Bucs just have so many guys on the outside for Brady to throw to, and then their defense isn't as bad as I think people are seeing. And then you mentioned White being out; he's going to be back this week. They obviously have a good defensive line, and I think it's going to be up to the Bucs secondary as to who wins this game. If the Bucs secondary can hang tough against the Saints, I think the Bucs are going to win this game. If the Bucs secondary gets torn up like they did in that second half against Heineke, then that could be a different story. And that's going to be – then you're going to ask yourself, is Drew Brees going to be able to make the throws, fit some throws into tight windows, and march the offense down the field if they want to beat the Bucs, especially in the Superdome, because even though the Bucs play outside, I feel like their offense is going to fit perfectly inside an arena, and they're going to be running all over the place.
Yeah, no, I think that offense is going to be built for speed, and that's perfect on turf. So, I mean, look, they're led by Tom Brady. They're ready to go. This man is pretty much unstoppable in the playoffs. He's really clicking on all cylinders right now. All you got to do is get the ball to Mike Evans. But on top of that, you got all those other weapons. Antonio Brown is looking really good right now. So between those two guys, that's really where I'm picking them to win the game.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun matchup this upcoming weekend in the NFL Divisional round. We're going to take a look back again to one of those AFC playoff games that we mentioned earlier, and that's the Browns versus Steelers. Crazy start to the game. This Steelers team has been the favorite in the AFC for most of the season, and then they started to struggle towards the end of the year, and you even heard the Steelers, teams don't normally do this, but they kept saying, because they didn't really have a bye week because of COVID, that they really haven't had a week off. They really haven't been able to rest. That's why they struggled down the stretch. They lost 3 in a row at the end of the regular season before beating the Colts in Week 16. And you thought, okay, the Steelers get rest in Week 17, and now they come up against a division rival. They're going to be ready to go, but they were not ready to go in this one, Brandon.
Right from the start there, and it was a huge play and a huge mistake on the center. Marquise Pouncey launching the ball over Roethlisberger's head. Then they just really couldn't pounce on the ball to make it a safety, and they just compounded the error rate there. And then Browns got an easy touchdown. And in the NFL, you don't want to give up easy touchdowns. I mean, in college or high school, you don't want to give up easy touchdowns. You're just putting yourself behind the ball. Now you're having to come out and maybe change what you want to do. But on top of that, I think the next 2 possessions, they just really got steamrolled, and it was momentum that really took them down. The momentum and especially in the playoffs, this is big. If there were fans there, maybe it could have helped out and it would have been a little different, but with no fans in the game, that didn't really help anything. But the momentum of the game itself, just getting down by that and seeing that happen on the first play, I think Pittsburgh was reeling a little bit. They didn't recover fast enough. The Browns took advantage. I know, like I said, I think within 2 to 3 possessions later, the Browns managed to pick off Ben Roethlisberger, turned those turnovers into points, and then they were just really looking down going into halftime. I know Mike Tomlin did everything he could to kind of try to rally, and they did in the second half. They rallied to make it respectable, but they just kind of dug themselves too big of a hole to be able to dig themselves out, and they lost the game, unfortunately. And it almost looks like it might be the end of an era there in Pittsburgh, especially for Ben Roethlisberger. And it's kind of sad. He had a great season, so I don't think he's going to be done playing, but maybe possibly done playing in Pittsburgh. So it's kind of sad to see him go out that way.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what the Steelers, try to do at the end of this season now that the season is over for them, where they're going to go at quarterback. They could kind of give Ben one more year just as a thank you to him, but they are a competitive team. They have a great defense, and they have a great receiver. So if you bring in a veteran quarterback in there, you're going to be right back up there at the top of the AFC once again if all goes well and everybody stays healthy. So that's going to be interesting what they do with him there. I think one of the biggest things, too, with this game, especially, you mentioned the 28-0 run that the Browns went on in the first half. One thing that does is that means that Baker Mayfield doesn't have to do too much offensively. They got that first touchdown off of special teams, and everything just kept rolling for the Browns then that allows Baker Mayfield to just be efficient. He was 21 for 34, 263, so it's not like he was throwing for 350, 400 yards, but he had a very good game. He had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, so there was, he could limit his turnovers. He didn't have to do too much in that game, and that, I think, helped the Browns, especially in the second, third, and fourth quarters, to kind of hang on to that lead, and I think that was huge for them.
Yeah, I think anytime you can just ask your quarterback to kind of manage the game, sit back, hand the ball off, and do some play action, not really ask him to do too much, especially not having to throw the ball downfield, I really think you can go. And with a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, he can easily do that. And I think that's exactly what you see in the Browns do, and they controlled the game throughout the second half. They didn't really have to do too much. They just kind of had to keep Pittsburgh from really having quick, explosive scoring plays. And that's exactly what they did. They made them earn it and come back into the game. And like I said, they made it respectable, but just not close enough to actually make it a win. And the Browns snuck away, and they're going to get to play Kansas City this weekend. But moving on to the next hot topic, really, especially of the week, in the NBA and around, especially regionally here for us in Boston, is the COVID issue that's going on with the Boston Celtics. Pat, what do you got on that?
Brutal going on right now. I mean, luckily the NBA is doing the right thing. They're postponing, a handful of games because of what's going on with the Celtics. They have 8, I think actually even 9 players that are either have COVID or are in COVID protocol. And this is really the first big test of the NBA in dealing with COVID. We saw it, when they were in the bubble and when the NHL was in the bubble, when all these leagues were dealing with the pandemic, it was a completely different story because they were isolated. They could really keep COVID out of the facility, and it worked out really well. It was unbelievable how well the bubble was at both the NBA and the NHL up in Canada. Now that they're bouncing around to all the different arenas, almost like a regular schedule, and you have a condensed schedule where you get to fit a lot of games in, you're having these players, go to all these different cities all the time, even though they're trying to keep the travel limited. And this was bound to happen, But I think also one thing that we have to look at, too, is the players themselves have to be more accountable. Because what happened with the Celtics to start off with COVID was that there were 4 Celtics players in a car together: Grant Williams, Robert Williams, Tristan Thompson, and Carson Edwards. They all rode in a car together, and only Carson Edwards had a mask on. The other 3 guys didn't. Then, of course, Robert Williams gets COVID, and the other 2 guys, Tristan Thompson and Grant Williams, have to sit with Robert Williams because they were in a car with him without a mask on. If the other 2 guys had worn a mask, or if Robert Williams had worn a mask, it could be a completely different story. It might have been just Williams sitting out. The other 3 guys might have been okay, and the Celtics might have had a few more players, over this past week that they might have even been able to play. But you have that. Now you have Tatum, who got COVID, and because Tatum got COVID, Jaylen Brown, who obviously spends a lot of time hanging around Tatum, both during games and pregame and everything else. You got Semi Ojeleye and also Javonte Green, who has to sit out because of COVID protocols. The one good thing I'll say about this, Tatum's getting it now. And now or at least you're pretty sure Tatum's not going to get it for the rest of the season. So it's better to have Tatum get this now and deal with it now than in April or May when you're in the postseason, you're fighting for a playoff spot, and your best player has to sit out because of COVID. So I think this is almost a little bit of a blessing in disguise that Tatum got it now, but still, this is a headache for the Celtics and for the NBA because now you're seeing all these other games getting postponed as well, and this is going to be a big to-do for Adam Silver.
Yeah, man, first off, I like your glass half full analogy, really, and thinking, hey, let's get it now so in case he doesn't have to get it later on in the playoffs and he'll be available to play. So that does work out good. And if you're going to have a silver lining in it, I think that's what it is. But it's really tough right now. I think, especially like I said, regionally here, you said like those first 4 got knocked down. We were like, all right, hey, maybe we can still get it done. But then when Tatum gets it, whoa, boy, was that a big knock. And that was some big news that I think we weren't expecting. And then just by the close contact and the COVID protocols that are going on, like you said, now it puts pretty much over half the team into quarantine protocol. And just by safety standards for the NBA, which I completely, totally get, you need 8 players to be able to play. I mean, this is a game where you got to have 5 on the court at all times. So you need 3 on the bench, and that's for injuries. It's not for people getting tired. These guys are young. They can run the length of the court. They can play back-to-back nights, but it's for injuries. You might have 1 or 2 injuries in the game, maybe even 3, and now you're asking 5 guys to play 40 minutes, maybe 40 plus if the game goes into overtime. So really, that's where a lot of these guys with close contact in the close contact COVID protocol, that puts them out, and then that's what put all these games in jeopardy. And the Celtics have had their last 3 games postponed due to this, having lack of the amount of players that you need, which is at least a minimum of 8 on the roster that are active. And I think currently they only have 7 that they could have active. And like you said, this is not just the Celtics that are dealing with it. It's other teams around the NBA that are going to be dealing with it. I know I saw the Philadelphia 76ers having to play Dwight Howard at point guard the other night. And boy, the memes on Twitter, if you saw the memes on Twitter that night about Dwight Howard playing point guard, they were amazing. But a lot of teams are going to be having to deal with this. You've seen it in the NFL, teams not having either one positional group, not having their running backs or tight ends. I think a team didn't have any quarterbacks that one game, right?
Yeah, Denver.
So you're going to see this going ahead in the NBA. And sadly, it's because COVID really is running rampant in the country right now. And obviously, there's no bubble, like you said. They're still traveling around. And I don't know, man. I think people are trying to be safe. The teams are trying to be safe. But it's really tough right now in this age of COVID to kind of keep your team in a bubble, per se, and to keep guys safe.
Yeah, I think one thing that the NBA just kind of tightened up some of the COVID rules, too. Before, if guys were in a hotel, on the road, they were allowed to have visitors. And it's like, is that smart for the NBA to allow that? I know, the players, when they were in the bubble, they felt so isolated, and I know it's tough. And I can't even imagine what it was like to not see family, to not be able to go out just to blow off steam after a playoff game or something. But you're in the middle of a pandemic. I think they made the right call. I think it was yesterday they had an owners or general managers meeting, and the commissioner talked to everybody and said, we got to tighten up these rules. So now they're not allowed visitors in the hotel. They actually can't meet before the game, I believe, something like 10 minutes before they go out on the floor.
Limited pregame interaction.
That. It's very, very limited pregame interaction until they go out onto the floor and they have more space to distance themselves from each other with the 6 feet rule and spreading apart there. So I think those are going to help. But I think they should have done that earlier. I know it's tough. These guys are only a few months away removed from the bubble where they were so restricted, but you have to do that if you want to get through this pandemic, if you're the guys from the NBA. Now, one season that did wrap up on Monday was the NCAA football season. Once again, Alabama wins the national championship. Brandon, with all the success that Alabama has had, is it any shock that they were the ones that won the national title in this season that was so topsy-turvy and crazy? The program that has sustained the most success was the one that won it this year?
No, not really, to be honest. And I mean, this decade of dominance of Alabama is just really not, for me, has not been a surprise at all. They really have some of the top recruiting classes every single year, and you've seen it. I mean, just look at their wide receiver room over these last 10 years has been amazing, with guys like Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Devontae Smith, just to name a few. But no, they've just been amazing, and they really pieced it together. Their offense was so explosive this year. I really didn't see anybody stopping them, to be honest. And their defense really didn't have to do too much, but I think they really showed up to play, especially defensively in the national championship game. But yeah, I mean, I think in this, once again, in this age of COVID, they've gone through the ups and downs of the season. Nick Saban tested positive for COVID twice.
Yeah, he did.
During the season. So not having your coach on the sideline, I know for one of the games that he tested positive, that hurt. And then I know he came back for the other game, but not being there for the preparation, I know that would hurt during the week. But he's built such a great staff around him. You see guys getting head coaching jobs and offensive and defensive coordinator jobs off of his staff routinely. So, the train just moves on with that team. And but my brother's a huge Alabama fan. He always tells me Roll Tide. And, the other day I just had to say it too. I had to say it, Roll Tide, because I mean, what is it, 6 titles in these last 12 years?
Yep.
That's just extremely impressive. You know, I'm a huge Florida State fan, and they had their decade of dominance in the 90s, and you saw that. But, I mean, I can't say it's matched to this run that Alabama's been on, and just Nick Saban personally winning 7 titles is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for them is their skills positions, like you mentioned earlier with the receivers. They've been absolutely loaded. You mentioned all the wideouts, but you look at the running backs. I mean, Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, he flat out in the NFL, but was still a very good college running back. Talked about Henry, Eddie Lacy, Kenyon Drake, TJ Yeldon, Josh Jacobs, Damian Harris here in New England. You know, Najee Harris is going to be probably a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. So when your backs and receivers are not just really good, but elite like those guys are, you're going to be good for that long. They haven't really had, I think Tua was probably their most highly decorated quarterback, both as a recruit and also how he performed at Alabama in the stats and being a high draft pick. We'll see where Mac Jones goes in the draft. I don't think he's going to be a top 5 pick by any stretch of the imagination, but that could change. But it's really been those skills positions that have been so good for Alabama for over a decade now that I think that's what's gotten them to this point.
No, I think you've nailed it on the head there. The skill positions are really getting it done. That core of running backs that you named there over that decade of dominance has just been unbelievable. And the wide receivers that we said, like we mentioned. But honestly, I'd like to point out the big boys up front, the offensive linemen. They have really been tearing it up on this run of titles as well. I think you got to see really one of their leaders come back on the field. I think Landon Dickerson, their center, he was out in the SEC championship due to injury, but he came back on the field last night at the end of the game to be able to snap the ball. And that shows you a lot about the team camaraderie that they're building on that team there. And even Devontae Smith, he said that he came and he stayed at Alabama to win a national championship and to get a college degree. So that's huge, where you had some guys that were opting out of bowl games. And on Alabama, I don't think you've seen anybody opt out. They were all there to win the title. That's exactly what they did. And I want to say this, another thing too is a lot of these guys, they won it in their hometown. Alabama has gone down to Florida, to South Florida, and recruited very well. So you had a lot of guys from the city of Miami that won this national championship in their hometown. And honestly, it was just impressive to watch. I knew the game was over when it was, I believe, in the 35-17. I actually went to bed. And then when I put on the game and the score in the morning and saw that they scored 52, wasn't surprised again. But, yeah, the decade of dominance just continues. And here's the thing, too. If I come into your living room and you're a Power 5 recruit, a 5-star recruit, and I tell you this, because this is the truth, if I guarantee you a national championship if you come to Alabama, would you be coming? Of course you would come. And with these guys, that's exactly the run that they've been on right now, is pretty much everybody that Nick Saban recruits gets a chance to win a ring, and most of them have.
Yeah, that's right. It's just they've got it down to a science where Saban shows up, he's got all his rings that probably can't fit on just one finger, and now he has, I know in the beginning of Saban's run, there was kind of a point where you're questioning, there were a few Alabama players that came out for the draft and weren't quite panning out in the NFL. But then as, the 2010s, when our most recent decade really first started, now you started seeing some blue chip guys get into the NFL and were just elite players in the NFL. And I think not only can you now preach how good your program is, the facilities are amazing, you're going to compete for a national title, but you're going to get drafted in the NFL probably in the first couple of rounds if you play at Alabama and you are that good of a player. So I think that's very important, too, for Saban going forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's another thing that you can get to say is, like you said, how many of these guys go in the first couple rounds of the NFL draft, and it's a lot of them. So, they get coached up well there. It's a great coaching staff. They really get to learn their X's and O's. So they're really coming in really a lot better off than some of these guys would be coming in as a rookie. And I think that one of the guys that you can really say to that is Damian Harris for the New England Patriots. Really came in, was ready to run the ball immediately as an NFL running back. But another guy that I'd like to move on to, because really it's been a hot topic all week. I asked to change out one of the topics. We had a different topic picked for this, but I said we have to change this out to talk about Deshaun Watson and his situation going on and ongoing in Houston, a very fluid situation that he currently wants out of Houston. What are you hearing on that, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame Watson for this point. You know, he didn't get along with Bill O'Brien. Neither did a lot of the other players at Houston. I heard actually that it was J.J. Watt who probably was the one who got Bill O'Brien fired, who said we can't have this guy here anymore. I actually always thought Bill O'Brien was a decent coach. It was Bill O'Brien, the GM, that really hurt Bill O'Brien, the coach in Houston, and I think that's sort of come to fruition. Then they have Jack Easterbay in there, who was with the Patriots as a team chaplain, almost like a team sort of minister, psychologist, really would sit down and talk to guys and help guys out, but was never really a personnel guy. All of a sudden, he's sort of thrust into this general manager, president of the team kind of role, and I don't think he really knows exactly what he's doing, and now it sounds like the players don't like him either. So then he makes a hire, again out of New England. So you have Bill O'Brien that comes in. Watson doesn't like him. Other players don't like him towards the end. Then you have Easterbay in there, who's also from New England. Players don't like him. Things aren't great. It's a mess. Then he hires the general manager, Nick Caserio, who I think is going to be very good, but he's also out of New England. And then you have another guy out of New England, and now it's like we keep taking these guys from the same place, and we didn't like the first two guys. Why are you grabbing another guy from that same program to then come in here again when we already didn't like the first two guys? The second part of that is Deshaun Watson talked to ownership, and I think he talked to Easterbay too, and said, could I please be part of this process? Could I be part of the process of picking the general manager,
really is in charge at this point of, calling that shot, because he has a no trade clause built into his contract. So he has to waive that no trade clause to actually be traded to a team. I heard he was willing to trade that, to waive that, to go to Miami. Is Miami going to be willing to do that in a kind of a swap for Tua Tagovailoa for Deshaun Watson? I think if I'm Miami, I'd be willing to do that. If I'm the Texans, am I willing to do that? Am I going to get enough in return for a generational quarterback that you might never get to see again, you might never have on your franchise again? And I'm talking about drafting in the future. They might never have a quarterback this good again, maybe ever again.
Right.
I was going to say 20 or 30 years, but honestly, maybe ever again. Deshaun Watson is a once-in-a-lifetime talent. This guy can throw on the run. He's a field general. He's a locker room guy. He's a high-character guy. He can be the face of your franchise. He can be the face of the NFL, realistically. This guy is such a good player, such a good person. This is the type of guy that you want to have on your team, and you want to give him a $300 billion contract so he sticks around. But you also want to give him those weapons, and you also want to give him a chance to have some insight into the roster and the guys that he's going to be playing with. I think you're seeing how the Texans didn't do that. They really upset him. He wanted to see Eric Bieniemy as at least brought in for an interview, and I guess the Texans didn't do that. And I mean, come on. How hard is it to just bring a guy in, give this guy an interview? Now your quarterback sees that, all right, you're seeing that he's part of the process, and that's going to go a long way, especially with him wanting to stick around. They didn't do that, and now he wants out of town.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if he does get traded to Miami, that is going to be a huge shapeshifter in the NFL, because first of all, now you're giving an elite quarterback, a top 5 quarterback, to the Miami Dolphins, who already have a good defense. I think they have a good head coach. They probably need to add another wide receiver, but Devontae Parker, very solid. Mike Gesicki, tight end, very solid. They got a good running game. They are going to be, now you throw them into the AFC East with the Bills, and you're going to have a really good top of the AFC East if you do have Deshaun Watson go to Miami. And then for Houston, I think Miami's one of those teams who, if they do get a quarterback, can be contenders immediately. So they are going to be willing to give up a lot of draft picks. First of all, they have Houston's first-round pick this year, which is number 3 because of the Laramie Tunsil trade that they made to Houston. So they'll be getting their pick back. Then they'll be getting Miami's probably the next 3 first-round picks, or maybe next 2, and then they include Tua, where if you're Houston, you bring Tua in. There's sort of a 50-50 debate on Tua, I think, in Miami right now. So if they're not huge fans of him, he goes down to Houston, gets a fresh start. We'll see who they add to the team, and then that might be better for both quarterbacks. They might get a completely new start for both of them, and that could help out both teams. So I think that would be a great trade. The biggest thing you got to see right now is Nick Caserio is going to be the one that is going to figure this out. He's either going to talk to Deshaun Watson and say, "I'm here now. I want to include you in the process. Let's talk. Let's figure this out." Or he might talk to Watson, and Watson might be ready to go right now and doesn't want to stick around. So then I think they do make that deal possibly with Miami. So we'll see how that shakes out over the next couple of weeks leading up to the draft in April. But a deal that was made today, breaking news earlier this afternoon of a disgruntled player in the NBA, is the James Harden deal. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Harden was traded from the Rockets to the Nets. Boatload of draft picks, several players bringing huge blockbuster trade in the NBA this afternoon.
I mean, this is really one of the biggest trades that we've seen most recently in the NBA. And if Deshaun Watson gets traded, this will be as big of a trade as James Harden getting traded today. So, I mean, you've seen it was a dump of picks that they traded over. Brooklyn's receiving 4 first-round picks. I believe 3 from Houston and 1 from Milwaukee. Is that what it was? One of Milwaukee's first-rounders through the Cavs.
Yep. Exactly.
So 4 first-round picks. Also, Karis LeVert, who we've talked about on this show before, is really a developing high player. He's part of that deal. But, I mean, you're getting the James Harden. You're getting a big 3 of James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. I know Kyrie Irving currently doesn't want to play basketball, but maybe this is the move that really gets him excited to come back and play basketball, playing with these guys. And I mean, I think automatically everybody says, it's obviously it's a championship caliber roster immediately, but I think you still have to fill in a couple of pieces around. If you look at the Warriors, when they acquired all those, Clay, KD, Steph, they still had a couple of guys around, like an Andre Iguodala. They had DeMarcus Cousins for a year. So Brooklyn is still going to have to go ahead and piece together a couple of people to make this a championship roster. But, I mean, right now, you have 3 scoring machines. Kevin Durant, Kyrie are two-way players. If James Harden could pick up his defense a little bit more, he'd be a two-way player. But, this guy's an unbelievable player. I think we talked about him, obviously, on this show before. Leads double-doubles, 40-point double-doubles in the league. He's just an unbelievable guy. I know we talked about how he's a little bit out of shape right now, but is still really tearing it up. And most recently, I was saying how this trade reminded me of the epic Ricky Williams trade, where the Dolphins and the Saints exchanged a player and a ton of picks. And it's realistically hedging the future of your franchise on one player. And I don't know. Brooklyn's gone ahead and done it, so we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for both teams just to get the parameters of the trade. Obviously, the Nets get Harden. Rockets get, for players, Dante Exum, Rodions Kurucs, who's has been around the NBA for a few years, but mostly just a bench player, if that. Journeyman. They had Karis LeVert. Then they flipped him. This actually became a 4-team deal. Karis LeVert's going to the Pacers. Victor Oladipo's coming back to the Rockets. So the Rockets get Oladipo, Kurucs, Dante Exum, and then they get 4 first-round picks. One of them's Cleveland's pick through the Bucks. So it's the Bucks draft pick that goes through Cleveland to the Rockets. And then the Rockets get 4 pick swaps with the Nets. So this is even bigger than the Nets trade that the Celtics made.
Huge
so
trade.
The Rockets actually control the Nets draft from this year all the way through 2027. So you have 8 years of drafts where you're either have the Nets pick or you're swapping with the Nets pick if their pick's better. And here's the other thing. Durant, Kyrie, and Harden, I believe, are only on the books for the next 2 years for the Nets. I believe if at least all three of them together would only be with the Nets for the next 2 years. Now, if things go really well, they might want to stay there. They're in New York. Why would they want to go anywhere else? We'll see what happens there. But they got to get it done over the next 2 seasons. So if they don't, and then the Nets struggle, if those guys leave, all those picks are going to be going to the Rockets, just like it happened with the Celtics. And that's how the Celtics got Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and a few other players. So I think it's the move that the Nets wanted to make. I think this makes total sense for the Nets, but it's an all or nothing trade. Whereas the Rockets, this is the best trade they're going to get. The other trade that was kind of on the table, I think, was if he had gone to Philly and they had gotten Ben Simmons back, he probably would have been the best player that they could have acquired for James Harden right now, as far as, top talent that's good right away. But getting Victor Oladipo in the deal, I think is a huge pickup too for the Rockets. He wants a fresh start. You still have John Wall there, so you don't want to leave John Wall by himself without another guy to play with, to run up and down the floor with. And now Oladipo, who's very athletic, who can shoot, very good defensive player. When he's healthy, he's battled some injuries over the last couple of years, but I think this might even make the Rockets a little bit better, not because they got the best player in the trade. Obviously, that was Harden. He's on the Nets. But I do think, if you look at it, the Rockets team overall might be in a better position because of how poorly Harden's attitude was over the last couple of weeks. People forget, too, he didn't start the season off in the very beginning because he didn't show up. And then, he had to go through COVID protocols and such. And then he started playing, and he's overweight. I mean, he's overweight compared to an NBA player. His overweight is my in shape. But he didn't start off the year well. So I think this makes total sense for both teams. And then the Pacers and Cavs. I mean, the Pacers just got Karis LeVert, who, is a very good player. I think, LeVert's going to really help the Pacers throughout the season. And this is a huge shift in the East. Brooklyn is now the favorite. And I think Indiana, you got to kind of creep them up a little bit too as contenders in the East as well in the NBA.
Yeah, if I have to look at this through a GM's perspective or even a coach's eyes, I think Houston is really the one that won out in this trade. With all those draft picks, you've got a future really built up for your franchise, a lot of options. You don't have to go ahead and make those draft picks, too. You could use those to go ahead and acquire other players to play alongside John Wall and Victor Oladipo. I think the addition to getting Oladipo is huge because obviously you lose your number one scoring threat in James Harden, but getting a scoring threat like Oladipo in return, he can really light it up in times, and he's a really great player. And I think he's been wanting to move. The Pacers have been wanting to move him. So I think the Pacers kind of just jumped in and took advantage of this deal and kind of said, hey, can we get in on this deal too? And kind of move our superstar, and that kind of helped things as well. But it honestly helped Houston in the long run. I think they're the one that's acquiring the talent for the long haul. Brooklyn is built to win now, but if they don't win now, everybody's going to say that this was a bad decision and a bust, giving up the majority of your draft picks going forward, and giving up a player like Karis LeVert, who's a young guy that was really developing. So, I mean, it's definitely a situation that we want to watch going forward, and I'm sure that it'll be a topic going forward on the show. But moving ahead to F1, Formula One racing, a topic that I know I'm going to love talking about on this show, and I'm hoping we get to talk about it as much as we can. The 2021 season of Formula One returns in March, but just looking ahead and looking back to the 2020 season, with Lewis Hamilton winning his 7th world title. Just an unbelievable achievement, tying the great Michael Schumacher for world titles, and I enjoyed watching it. It was a pleasure. Pat, what do you think about 7 world titles?
It's just unbelievable. I mean, we see this in other sports where we look at, Tom Brady has gone to 9 Super Bowls. He's won 6. He's been to, I don't even know how many AFC championship games. It possibly could get to an NFC championship game this season. Patriots went to, I forget how many straight from 2011 on. But this has been unbelievable. Not just the amount of world titles that he's won. You mentioned the 7, including last year. He won 4 straight, actually, 17 through 20. But also, he's never since 2007. He's never finished lower than 5th. And I think that's the only. I think it was just one time he was 5th. He's been 2nd a couple of times. He's been 3rd a couple of times. So he's just been so dominant on the F1 racing circuit. To have somebody like that, it's huge for the sport, because now you have a face and you have an athlete who is so dominant that they can carry viewers to F1 than if you have younger racers or racers that aren't quite as well known, race in these contests, that you can kind of get some popularity, or see their popularity rise because Lewis Hamilton is in some of these races. But just an unbelievable dominance from him over really the past 13, 14 years.
No, I agree. I mean, a lot of the argument is that he's driving one of the best cars, but you still have to be one of the best drivers and get it done. I want to compare it to like the Barry Bonds streak of home runs, where people are like, oh, he's on roids, so that's why he's hitting those home runs. You still got to step into the box and pick off a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, right? So it's really one of those things where he was still getting it done, even though he's in one of the better teams and one of the best cars, with Mercedes being really dominant in Formula One over the last decade. But Lewis Hamilton has really been that driving force. I think you really got to see his skill this year in 2020, a challenge 2020, obviously due to COVID, with the calendar of Formula One being changed, the protocols of Formula One being changed, no fans, but you really got to see some of his best racing going forward. The Grand Prix in Silverstone and Grand Prix of Great Britain, where he finished the race on 3 tires, finished on a punctured tire, and still won the race. I mean, have you ever tried driving your car on 3 tires with a puncture? It's not easy, and especially going 150 to 200 miles an hour. So that really showed his brilliance there. But then again, later in the season at Turkey, on a wet track, a difficult track, the car really wasn't suited to be really one of the top cars and one of the front runners in that race. But he still went ahead. I think he started P6 on the grid, still went ahead and won the race with a car that, like I said, really wasn't built for that track or built to win that day. Showed his aggressiveness, showed his skill in the car, really went ahead, took himself to the front. That's why you're seeing that he's a 7-time world champion. And Formula One is this international mega sport, and he is the international mega superstar, up there with the likes of a Michael Jordan and a Tiger Woods.
Right. And you talked about how, some folks have said that because he's got such a good car that's why he's won so many titles over the last few years. But you also just made the case for why he's the best, because of the adversity that he's had to deal with on the track, going on only 3 wheels, winning on a wet track where his car wasn't ready for a track like that. So that just shows you how good of a racer he is, and it's not just about the car for Lewis Hamilton. He's going to be fun to watch in this upcoming F1 season, obviously, once again. Finally, our last topic, it's what's happening tonight. The NHL season is finally here. It's starting tonight. It's very interesting because, they finished up right around the same time the NBA did. It took them a little bit longer to get their next season going, but, you wonder how strategic it was to start right around this time because, you are in the midst of the NFL playoffs, but after this upcoming weekend, you're just going to have the 2 conference championship games on Sunday, then you have the week off, then you have the Super Bowl, and then the NFL's done. You just had the NCAA football season wrap up on Monday. So, the NBA is sort of the middle of their season. They're always playing at the same time as the NHL anyway. So I do wonder, did the NHL want to wait until college football was over and the NFL was towards the end of their season and in the middle of the playoffs to start? And I think this actually helps them for viewers, because once the NFL season is over, we got to a point with COVID where once the NBA came back, the NHL came back. Then you had NBA and NHL on almost basically every night. Then the NFL started while those 2 teams were still in the playoffs. So you had playoff games in the NHL and the NBA and NFL football, and then college football on. We had a smorgasbord of sports going on in the fall into October, and even I think early November the NBA was still going with the finals. You had so much going on that everybody's eyeballs were kind of spread everywhere. Now that the college football season is over, NFL is winding down. now people are going to be looking for other things to watch now that football is going to be over, and maybe that's going to help hockey, as they start up the 2021 NHL season. I think the timing of this is very good for the NHL.
Yeah, no, and I think it was strategic, and I think it was strategic for viewers and the timing, like you said, of these other sports ending. But I think it was also strategic when you look at COVID and the impact of COVID in the two main countries of obviously the United States and Canada. I think the realigning of the divisions clearly shows that, where you have the North Division, which is just all Canadian teams. So those teams do not have to come and travel into the United States. So they'll just be playing each other. And then you have the new formed East, where you have really all the Eastern teams. Honestly, when I looked at it, I was like, why aren't the divisions aligned like this in the past? I mean, that's what I thought they should have been. And like I said, it's going to make an interesting season where you're going to, I know, take the NFL, you get to see a divisional opponent twice, right? So you get to see a lot. You learn a lot about them. Now in the NHL, you're going to get to see a divisional opponent 8 times in one season. So I think it's going to get chippy. And we know in the NHL and hockey, that's what we all love to see anyway, is slap shots and fighting and 5-minute major penalties. I know that's why I'm watching personally. But yeah, I think, this is going to be a great season for the NHL. You got some superstars that you can still look forward to carry the flame of the NHL. Alexander Ovechkin is really a great guy to watch always. And I'm looking to see how he meshes with the addition of Zdeno Chara, which, like I said, we talked about him on this show before, adding into that Washington Capitals team. And, as a fan, I'm just really looking to see what they can do together.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how those guys play together. 2 big dudes, too, who can hit playing together in Washington. But, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, everybody's going to be dealing with COVID. All these pro sports leagues are going to be dealing with it. The NBA's got their issues right now. I think the NHL just started off with 24 players testing positive in training camp leading up to the start of the season. I believe it was 17 of those players were from the Dallas Stars. I might have my numbers mixed up. Maybe it was 27 or 14. Either way, more than half of them were from the Dallas Stars. So they obviously have an issue down there in Texas. Because everything's bigger in Texas, so why isn't COVID bigger in Texas, right? But they're going to have to deal with COVID, an outbreak like the NBA is right now. I think at some point too. So there are those challenges, but I think at this point now, we were all kind of like the NFL when they were dealing with COVID. We got frustrated with the situation in Denver with the quarterbacks. We got frustrated with games getting moved around, teams losing their bye weeks and so forth. But the NFL kind of just plowed through it, and I think that's just kind of what you have to do. I know they want to cater to the players as much as possible. Obviously, health and safety is number one, but these leagues are just going to try to get these games in because the biggest issue with the NBA and the NHL right now is that they want to get this season done so that they can then start on time for the 21-22 season because that's when they believe and they're pretty much assured that they're going to be able to have fans in the stadiums again and they can start making real money again because they're losing a lot of money without having fans in the stadiums now. They don't want to mess with next season. They want next season to start on time as usual with the draft, free agency, and so forth. So they're just trying to get these seasons in. And much like the NBA, I think the NHL is going to try to, just get through this season, even if they do have to deal with some COVID outbreaks throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, money talks, and money is the driving force, especially in professional sports. I think we sometimes tend to forget that as analysts or fans that, sometimes it is about the bottom line, especially for these owners. But that's why a lot of these games have really still been pushed forward, even with the ongoing COVID thing. I look back at it and I said, wow, I mean, how are they going to have professional sports? But then I was just looking at it and I'm like, yeah, they're going to have professional sports because of the money. I think the NFL has proven that, like I said, even team had no quarterbacks. They weren't willing to postpone the game. The NFL didn't postpone or cancel not a single game this season. I think, like you said, they're really looking to stay on track to keep themselves so they're playing through their natural cycle of seasons. But I'm looking to see what the NHL can do, and especially with this realignment of the divisions. And I think it'll still be an exciting season once they can kind of get back into the swing of things, especially for play. It's such an exciting sport, a fast sport. So I'm really looking to see, what's going to happen in the NHL season.
Yeah, one final thing with the NHL too is, when the playoffs kick in, the play kind of kicks up, because throughout the regular season it's so much of a grind for the NHL, and then with the playoffs, the intensity heightens. You wonder if because there's less games during the regular season this year in the NHL, if the intensity is going to be ratcheted up a little bit more this time around, kind of like it was in the postseason in their Canadian bubble that they had this past year during the beginning of the pandemic. Folks, that's it for our third edition of Comeback Sports. We had a lot of fun tonight. And Brandon, I just think your final thoughts on what was a crazy sports day today.
Well, my final thoughts, honestly, I want to go back to Deshaun Watson. If the Patriots let the Miami Dolphins go ahead and trade for Deshaun Watson, they're crazy. Here's what I do if I'm the Patriots GM. I take N'Keal Harry, I ship him and anybody else on the roster to the Texans, including 2 first-round picks. Send Deshaun Watson up here to New England. We need a new quarterback, but that's my last thought for the day, honestly.
Yeah, I love Watson too. I'd love for him to be on the Pats. I don't. How many picks is enough? I think is the question. And yeah. I don't want Watson to come up here and the cupboard be dry with who he's going to be, or cupboard be bare with who he's going to be throwing to. And right now, the Patriots don't have guys that he's going to be throwing to, at least that we think right now are legitimate weapons for him. So I don't want him to come up to basically the same situation he has down in Houston, but I would love for him to play for the Patriots as well. But folks, we want to thank you again for joining us here on Comeback Sports. Make sure you check us out on YouTube. You can see our Twitter handles are at the very bottom of the screen there. As you can see them, both Brandon and I. So make sure if you want to tweet at us some questions, some comments about the show. You can also dip in onto our live chat on YouTube. This will be posted on YouTube. We want to thank our director and producer, Ben Kudo, who's been doing a phenomenal job.
Great job.
Show off. He's been fantastic in dealing with the two of us as we try to fit topics in at the last minute before we come on the show. So, folks, thanks again for joining us here on Comeback Sports. We'll see you next time.